Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 375th New Social Environment. I'm Ty Cooper, a production and events assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Charles H. Traub and Lyle Rexer. We're thrilled to have the poet Cynthia Dewi Oka here to read to close today's program. A few quick notes before we get started. The Rail team will be helping out with tech if you have any questions. Closed captions are available by pressing the live transcript button at the bottom of the screen. And now we've started all of our events here at the Rail with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation, as said by the great Angela Davis. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat in just a moment for a living document of resources and actions. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Artist Charles Traub is the chair of the MFA program in photography, video, and related media at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. He holds an MS from the Institute of Design at the Illinois Institute of Technology and a BA from the University of Illinois. He was formerly the director of the prestigious Light Gallery of New York and was president of the Aaron Siskind Foundation for Support of Creative Photography. He is one of the co-founders of Here is New York, a democracy of photographs, which received the Brendan Gill Award of the Municipal Arts Society, Cornell Capa Infinity Award, and a Distinguished Service Award from the Children's Aide Society of New York. His book, Tickety-Boo, will be published in September 2021 by Damiani. Independent critic, curator, and writer Lyle Rexer is the author of The Critical Eye, 15 Pictures to Understand Photography, The Edge of Vision, The Rise of Abstraction Photography, Photography's Antiquarian Avant-Garde, The New Wave in Old Processes, and others. He has published hundreds of catalog essays and articles on art, architecture, and photography, and contributed to such publications as the New York Times, Harper's, and Art in America, among others. He has lectured at many institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and Yale University, and he teaches in both graduate and undergraduate programs at SVA. Lyle, take it away.
So it's great that we could be here. It's just came together relatively quickly. And it's a nice reversal for me because this is a chance where I get to ask Charlie questions as opposed to him usually asking me questions about what I've been up to. So, and Charlie, I should, as a disclaimer, Charlie's my boss at SBA. So I think we have to put that on the table right away. That said, just a couple of things, and I'll just jump into it. A couple of things about Charlie, and I think just to give us a little context. Well, actually, if we can move out of that, I want to keep my screen up. I've got a bunch of books here by Charlie. One is Lunchtime, okay. One is Taradiddle, and the first one is Dolce Via, which is a lot of Charlie's work from Italy. We're going to come back to that, especially the Italian work, although that's not our primary focus. I say that because these are all books that he's been engaged with Damiani on, and what really amounts to a kind of omnibus publishing project for, I think, for his own archive, for his own work. And that will, going forward, I think, prove to be a very, very important group of pictures. The latest iteration of that is the pictures that he's been taking for the last, I think, 5 years with his phone camera, with his cell phone. And I got to thinking about this when I had a chance to look at these images. As far as I know, and I've tried to research this, someone probably knows this better than I do. The first cell phone book that I know of was one that was published about, and it used an Ericsson phone, and it came out around 2005. So the idea of doing a book of iPhone images as a thing has been around for, 16, 17 years. It's very interesting to think about a tradition that doesn't exist yet, but that is already developing. And I'm sure Charlie's book fits into that category. So it's a chance for me to ask Charlie some questions, and I think important questions about his movement into using the iPhone, a kind of casual device, an extension of our senses, if you will, and just to ask some questions about it. So I wonder if we could bring up the full book. It's a book called Tickety-Boo, and we'll bring up that. And if I can just jump in, I thought what we might do is just, I'll shut up for a minute. If we could just scroll through the first sequence of pictures, and I think that's probably 8 or 9 spreads. You can see how it goes. It's a nice camera on the wall there. Great. That was quite a fast trip. We're going to come back to this several times because I think it's an important sequence, not just because it opens the book, but also because I think an embryo tells us a lot about the way the book sets up. It also tells us about, I think certainly about Charlie's sensibility, about what he likes to look at, and maybe most importantly, how the pictures actually got put together, because this is ultimately a book after all. It's a series of fairly self-conscious decisions about how things are going to be organized. Well, my first question to Charlie is, look, how did this develop? You know, I think about Walker Evans moving toward the Polaroid, for example, late in his life when he was having trouble lugging around his large format camera. And he moved almost, I would say, obsessively into the realm of the Polaroid. Love that technology. There are other examples of photographers shifting gears. So tell me a little bit about how this whole project came about. What was your process?
Well, I had been, as you know, I've been a digital image maker for, I don't know, since 1998 or so, more or less. I don't think I've touched film since then. And I used a lot of point and shoot cameras. Just before that, the famous Yashica T5 or T1, I forget, with the Zeiss lens. And I just found the lighter the camera, in fact, and digital cameras were lighter, the more free you were to interlock with anything and everything that one encounters in their sauntering, which is what I like to say I do as a photographer, just walk and saunter and look. And the last major project I did was about US grant. It was iBook with audio and text, and it's out and anybody can have it for free, by the way. It's about his contribution to our culture. And that was a project. But since then, and that was 2014, 2015, I really hadn't come up with a new project. And in fact, I felt so liberated by the development of the iPhone, and particularly once the 11 came out and the 12 and so on and so forth. Its cameras, its accessibility, its immediacy. You know, people say, you know, where's your watch? And I say, oh, I have a pocket watch. And where's your camera? I have a pocket camera. And I just decided that I was free to look at anything everywhere that I am, encounter it in terms of my search for myself. And I posted them pretty almost immediately when I made these pictures. I rarely ever, well, maybe, you know, within a couple of hours sometimes. And I got so much feedback from them online, that people commenting and liking and so on and so forth. And then I realized that there really is a body of work, and there is an idea here, an idea that defines me as a knowledgeable working photographer who's been at this for, I guess, almost 54 years, both teaching and photographing. And that I was really liberated. And I suspect that Walker Evans felt the same thing. Suddenly he could just respond instantaneously without any preconceived notion of what he was supposed to do or how he was supposed to do it. And that's what I think that the iPhone or the cell phone or the smartphone has allowed me to do. And in the end, there's always a theme. There's always a notion about something that you develop, and particularly through a career as long as mine, where every picture I've ever made becomes part of me and becomes part of the history and what I reference, and also my knowledge of photography and art. And you can't just do this without developing a personality, a photographic personality. Recently, I came across a quote that somebody quoted that said, who said that I said this, but I don't remember saying it. And it goes like this: the unique character of an artist is linked to the drive to rediscover the self in one's own work. Charles Traub. I guess I said it somewhere. I think that's a pretty apt description of what I'm doing with the cell phone.
Well, I'd like to, I really want to unpack this a little bit, because I think there's a number of things that we'll need to engage in looking both at this work and maybe thinking about the broader context in which this work is situated in kind of the landscape of contemporary photography. The first is what you were talking about, a kind of, this kind of freedom that you're talking about. And I think there's a kind of general attitude about photography with the cell phone camera that this is the defining characteristic of the cell phone. That is, it is the extension, it's a spontaneous extension of the person. And it is their kind of, you might say, their diary, their autobiography, whatever, without that kind of constructedness. It's spontaneous. And in many senses, it's casual. And I think that's the general attitude for the way I think people think about how cell phone cameras are used, quite apart from whatever you're shooting or who you're sending it to. But the other part of this, and I think you touched on it, and I want you to talk about this a little more. We have the appearance of like extreme casualness in many of the pictures in this book, and yet you're talking about the fact that your entire career prepared you to be free.
Yeah.
And that interests me a lot. So as you look at these pictures, what aspects of yourself, that kind of freedom that reveals you, what are you seeing in these pictures that maybe you didn't see before about you? I think it's a super interesting idea.
Well, it's all me. So it's hard to unpack that in a way, as you would just said. You got to remember that I'm a product of the Institute of Design, the new Bauhaus. And certainly the big mantra that my generation there inherited was the camera is indeed an extension of the eye. And certainly the cell phone is that. It's unobtrusive, it's accepted. Oh, he's just taking a selfie, or he's just talking to somebody. You're very there, but at the same time hidden. And I've always been a person who just wants to touch. I feel that's part of it. I want to look at everything. I want to feel it. I want to get at the tactility of it. I like looking at people. I think one of the great things about New York is, and living here as long as I have, is just people watching. It's just, there's no place on earth like it. And I want to know who that person is. I want to know why they're dressed like that. I want to know, what's she staring at in this picture? Why is she staring? And why is she transformed into something spiritual? And there are some pictures here that are like that. They transcend into something that I'm looking for, or that I feel that every picture is a transformation of what was really there. It's okay. It's a taradiddle. It's a tickety-boo. It's all okay, except maybe something is wrong. Maybe it's not right. And we kind of know that about the whole world at this point. So if you look at this overall, there's this feeling of engaging my need to engage the outside world, the stuff outside of me, to bring it into me. And photography allows that in a way I think probably no other creative medium does. You can capture and keep and you transform, and of course it's all a lie. It's all taken out of context. But the bigger picture is, and this is why this is a book, there is a theme running through it. There's a political theme, a social theme, about feelings I have about relationships in the world between things. And it's all connected into a dialogue that I think this book unfolds, particularly if you go in the beginning of it. It start at the beginning and turn the pages sequentially throughout the book. I like to say, I hope the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I want to do that. I want to follow up. Yeah.
You know that I'm a photographer here. You know that I'm interested in diverse people, that I'm interested in how things come together, irrespective of where they are as an abstraction. It's all abstract. I think I could talk more specifically, you know, that looking at something, it becomes a value to me. This funny picture in an old hotel in Montana, you know, beautifully framed, you know, just a generic kind of landscape, and the invasion of the media beside it. I lived through all of this. You know, these are experiences for me that make who I am as a person, I think.
Well, let's take a look, and because I don't want to hang on this set of pictures, but I think they're super important. Let's go back to the first one, because I want to walk through and see exactly how your transitions work. And I need to point out here that it's, as you said, it's a book. And because it's a book, and I know you work with Blake Ogden on the development of this object. So a lot of choices have been made about how the pictures will relate to each other. But there's a certain kind of consistency to all these, let's call them sequences. And to me, they make the book go. I mean, the individual images, and maybe we can get to this later on, are, you say, greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I think that's an enormously important idea also for contemporary photography, because there's a paradox going on. But here's our opening image. Let's go to the next spread. You can see what this is. It's a camera. And then we go from the camera to things that are framed. One's a digital, obviously digital media. The other is a kind of an old-fashioned, you know, frame, like you said, in a hotel with a kind of kitsch image in the middle of it. That idea of kitsch is going to come back over and over again. And let's go to the next. We go from that idea of framing and media to another kind of frame and another kind of image, which is, again, very much about our moment. It's about that period in which you were making the pictures, which is the time of COVID. And then we make another shift. And this is what I love about the book. Let's stay with that first spread. We make another shift where now we're dealing with maybe some formal issues. That is to say, that trick that photographers love to do, where you go from a blue thing to another blue thing, from something that's straight and flat to something that's rumpled, where the circles start to play with each other, where other kinds of framing comes into the picture. Let's go to the next one. Go to the next spread. And we go from that big circle with the crumpled thing in it to something that's a little bit more fugitive, a little harder to figure out what the relationships are, but you've kind of set us up. It's almost like you asked us to think about, how are these things related? They can be related formally, they can be related thematically, they can be related existentially, maybe spiritually. So let's go to the next spread. We go from that beautiful circle to something that kind of takes us back to that camera, which is about looking and eyes and about these kind of random circles. And let's go to the next one, which I think ends the sequence. No, right. You continue with this, you bring in a bunch of other themes, and then to the next one, which I believe is the last one in the sequence. Yes, and a tree with something that looks like an eye in it. So I want you to tell me a little bit about how you structure these sequences and what you and Blake, what you were thinking about when you were doing this. Because these kinds of transformations come up over and over again in the book.
For the audience, Blake Ogden is a photographer and expert printer, and who I've worked with, a graduate of this program and formerly a commercial artist printer. And I'm not very adept digitally, despite all my interest in the digital world. I have arthritis. I can't move things in my hand. I can't move things. And I picked out the bigger bulk of these pictures, probably twice this number. I think there are 208, probably close to 400. And I went through with him and we weeded them down. And then we printed them out on a just a cheap printer, put them up on a wall. And then I started moving them around with him. And sometimes he would say, look at that. And I saw chapters forming. In this case, we'll call it the all-knowing eye. The all-knowing media. Everywhere that eye is looking at us. And also, what is that? There are so many billions of cameras out there. The number is phenomenal, like almost 100 billion cameras. Imagine how many images they're making every minute, So I'm kind of referencing the presence of that all-knowing media, and the circle is the existential circle in a way that brings everything together or connects it, and so a chapter forms, and then you get another sense. Well, how do you get to the next thing? The pictures are on the wall. You move them around, then you reorganize them in the computer. And it took us a lot of work and many iterations of this. I would say probably 5 major iterations of the sequences that went on. You have something together and you see something better to put together. And as you said, it's often about learning how to see, how to organize as a photographer sees. Color is one thing, object is another, meaning underneath it is another. Right. And you really do try to make something that has that notion of meaning underneath it. I'm going to quote something here, which I like very much, from de Kooning. Content is a glimpse of something, an encounter like a flash. It's very, very tiny, but it's content. And I think that is in every good photograph, perhaps in every photograph, depending on the context and how it is seen or read. And that applies to this first chapter, we'll say.
Yeah, I wonder about that. And again, there's so much to talk about here. 2 things really strike me. First of all, again, coming back to this idea about whether pictures can stand on their own. And the thing about the iPhone that has really been intriguing to me, and I've got some more images I want you to respond to as well later on, is that what the iPhone is telling us in many ways, it strikes me, is that the pictures can be personal, they can do a variety of different things, but there's a way in which they're not meant to stand on their own exactly, that they want to talk to each other. And it's just become so clear looking at the way you have organized this work that there's a whole other dimension to the process that in many cases people never get to with their iPhone cameras. And that's the process of seeing how the pictures actually talk to each other. And, when I think about, it's a weird model for this, but when I think about, say, for example, Robert Frank's The Americans, one of the things that's always puzzled me, and we've had this conversation, it's always puzzled me that the pictures themselves, many of them are very striking, but there's something about them that is much less interesting than the way the pictures actually talk to each other when Frank sequences them. And that for me is the kind of radical jump here. This is very different. The way you organize pictures, and I think the way younger photographers organize their pictures, is really different from pretty much everybody in the past, except maybe for somebody like Robert Frank, which is one of the things I think that if photographers take something from him who are in their 20s now, it's maybe something from the Americans. I'm not sure about that, but that's why I think the editing part is so important in this book. And it's what, for me, makes it so intriguing. The way you morph through these different you might say levels, from the formal to the philosophical, to the spiritual, to the political. We'll come back to some of those themes, and maybe we'll jump to some right now. But that concentration on the second part, not the shooting, but the thinking and the looking. And like you say, interrogating yourself and the pictures as you make the book. That's super interesting to me. And that must have been a really, really, I think the most important mental part of this.
No question. I mean, there's a body of work on that phone, but finding that body of work and making that body of work make, let's say, sense, make a statement, it is a tremendous amount of work. Taking the pictures, for somebody like me who is as practiced as I am, and every good artist has to practice, and I practice all the time, is easy or easier, but putting the notes and the chords together, takes a whole nother set of contemplation, thinking, practice again. And when you sequence, you're practicing too. I've had a lot of experience doing it. I think any artist is really measured by her or his body of work. I mean, everybody can make one good photograph, perhaps even a good painting. But can you extend the notion of what makes that one good one into many good ones, and evolve it so that they don't all look alike also, or each piece evolves from the next? And I think that's why most artists say, well, what's your most important work? They'll say, what I'm working on now. Because you keep trying to dream the dream forward in some way that is you. And I think the book, and particularly because we can do them a little easier than we used to be able to do that, is the object. It is the work of art, not a single picture. I mean, lots of people have photographed a tree with an eye on, a birch tree or aspen. But it is how it's placed and in the context of the host, of the previous picture, the next picture, the blank that's here. And I think in sequencing and in making and organizing is what makes my body of work, if it works.
Yeah, again, I'm impressed by, well, we're going to get to the young part of this because I want to talk about younger photographers in relation to your book. And maybe we'll table that because I do think there's a young mindset going on here. But I wanted to look at
a lot of young image makers.
Yes. And look, I've taught enough 20-somethings in my classes to let them teach me as they've taught you about a very different way of thinking about their own pictures. And it's very much what's going on in this book, which is you make pictures and you set them up just the way you did. You put them all up there, and then you start to play with them. And you see how they talk to each other. And sometimes they say things that are very obvious. Sometimes they say things that are ironic and funny. Sometimes they don't see anything at all, but something else is being said. And you stick with that for 10 minutes. Then you take them all down and you start all over again. And they tell you something completely different. And you go, okay, I think I've got the sequence. And all the other pictures are pushed aside. Then you come back in 2 weeks and somebody says in the class, put those pictures up again. What about that one of the red telephone you shot? And the red telephone goes up, and then all the other pictures come back and they get reinvented. And watching that, and this is not conventional picture editing. This is not where you go look for the best picture and you say, yeah, the exposure is wrong here, or I didn't get this quite right. it really doesn't have anything to do with that. It's only about how the pictures communicate with each other and through them to us. And that's what I loved about this book. It was like you embracing this kind of technology that I like to think of as a young person's technology, but it clearly isn't. It's a super liberation, and it's fascinating. Anyway, I want to move on. I want to look at spreads 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27, if we could do that. Okay. Yeah, so let's just scroll through these guys. And these are kind of picked at random. I mean, I could almost pick any sequence, but I love this for some reason. I'm just hooked on some of these pictures. Okay, there we go. So let's go back to the beginning of that set. Spread 22. This is actually 22 is a kind of lead in from another set of pictures, but that deal with some other themes in this chapter. But one of the things you mentioned before, and I really wish you'd talk a little bit more about that, is not so much the inundation of media, because we're used to that, right? There's media all around us. But I think for a photographer, the constant presence of already represented, that is, things that are representations in the frame. And I picked these two to start here because they're really obvious. Somebody's looking at their phone. But the next thing, we start to see all the things in pictures that are, in a sense, either already pictures or already text. And, you know, that photographers have been hooked on this for 100 years at least. But if we just scroll through the sequence, we see this kind of increasing kind of presence of representation, even when it's blanked out, like that beautiful abstract painting that's just a bunch of stuff on the wall behind these people and looks like, I don't know, a restaurant maybe. And then the equestrian pictures in the next one in the restaurant. The representation is all around us. It's everywhere. And the person that this reminded me the most of, and it's someone you knew, and I wonder if you talk about this, is Luigi Ghiri. And if we could go to just quickly, if we can go to the slideshow that I set up, I want to just show the first two Ghiri images. Yeah, it just takes a second for us to jump into there's a set of extra pictures that I thought Charlie and I could take a look at. Here's a Ghiri picture. A bunch of people looking at a picture of something that they want to go visit, but they're not there yet. And the next one, which is a real famous one. This is hats. I think this is this is in Parma. It's hats in a hat store. And so has Ghiri been an influence for you? Well, this, by the way, there's a whole sequence of hats, which we may show, where Charlie just does a whole bunch of hats.
I hadn't thought about this picture in terms of the hats, but that's interesting that, in fact, I got to the hats probably in somewhat the same notion that he did. I knew Ghiri very well. I met him in the late 70s at Arles, and at that time I was the director of the Light Gallery, and I was just blown away by his work, the Kodachrome work that's in the book Kodachrome. For those of you who don't know him, he was Italian. He died at 46. He's been dead at least almost 30 years, I guess now. He was my age, so. He was a prolific photographer. He did commercial work. He did all kinds of things, and he organized almost all the contemporary photography and photographers in Italy, which were not known to certainly to the American audience at that time. And I showed his work at Light Gallery in 79 or 80, I'm not sure which year. And it was the first showing of his in New York. It got very little attention. We put up the prints, lots of prints, hung them not in this solemn way, but in groups and things like that. And I felt at the time that he was as important, if not more important, than any of the young and rising color photographers of the American ilk. In fact, I think today, many people agree with me. By the way, I think he was postmodern before postmodernism.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that a little bit because he's very much on your wavelength.
He's very much on my wavelength. My work was already sort of geared to that same sentiment. I think it's why I loved it. If you look at my early Chicago work, or you look at my Kentucky work, which was when I was my salad days, really young, you see all kinds of elements of what's now in Tickety-Boo. Gary and I also photographed together in Italy. We did a project in Naples with a number of other photographers. And I started working on a book called Italy Observed about all kinds of photography about Italy and literature. So yes, I don't think there's any question that I traveled emotionally and metaphorically with him all the time. I have other influences, of course,
Sure.
like Siskind, who was my mentor, and Gary Winogrand, who I worked with. And of course, the whole history of photography. You can't get away from it when you're as involved every day in it as I am. But I think Gary represents this, as you said, the idea of what media representation represents in the image, the object taken and put into a context of real space or into real action. And I'm very interested in that. I've always been interested in the humor that creates and the kind
Yes.
of, hey, what's going on here? This isn't right, but it is right. It is exactly what happens in the idiosyncratic energies of our life. We take things out of context and we look at them and say, well, that's a hat. Well, yeah, it's a bunch of hats. And that hat defines the space, not the space, the hats. And of course, with cameras everywhere, we're seeing, who knows what we're finding and not seeing that the camera is seeing.
Well, let's go to, actually, if we can, let's go to, if we can jump back. I know this is a little confusing, but let's go to the spreads from 28 to 30 not in the slideshow. We'll go back to the PDF here. And if we can go to 28 to 30, and we'll see a little kind of Luigi Gary game going on here, which I think is really fun.
Well, I certainly wouldn't have thought about it in those terms when making those pictures. But
no, of course not. But anyway, so let's just
embedded in my scene. Go ahead.
Let's go to 29. Let's go to 30. And I think we keep going with this. I don't know if it keeps going to 31. I can't remember. Yeah, of course, and maybe 32 too. I can't remember. No, okay, so it stops there. But the two things. One is just really delighting in the things that people wear, the kinds of bags they carry, you might say the representations that they surround themselves with, whether it's like a goofy t-shirt with something written on it, or whether it's, again, the other part, sitting in a restaurant where there's a beautiful abstract painting behind you. So much of that seems to me right on Gary's wavelength. And it leads me to ask you a question that has to do with younger photographers who you teach and who you see. Because it cannot be an accident that just as we have a kind of a real rise in, and I mean, you testify to this, the book does, thinking about, among younger photographers as well, thinking about what actually the iPhone camera or the cell phone camera is actually doing when you make these pictures. It's no accident that we have precisely now an increasing interest in Gary's work, right? It shows up in group shows all over the place. There was just a big show. I can't remember where it was. I think it was in Italy of Geary's work. And I can't get out of my mind the fact that he was thinking about the way we make pictures in the same way that you were thinking and are thinking about the way we make pictures. What are we looking at? How much of it do we think is natural? And yet there's so much cultural stuff in there already. And then also, what do we think people are going to do with these pictures? How are they going to respond to them? What is it that we think they're looking for when they look at these pictures? And Geary was very secure in that, but you seem to open all that up again. And it's really, for me, it's really a pleasure to go back and resurrect, or not resurrect, but to reconvene those questions. In that context, I wanted to go back to the slideshow and just make a point that this is not an accident. I mean, we are seeing many younger photographers, and that's why you kind of stand in, I think it seems to me, a very important position, who are thinking, they're not thinking like Geary, but they are thinking very much about what to shoot, about why to take a picture, and about how those pictures might talk to each other in ways that we're not used to if we're hooked on the idea of making the perfect picture. The pictures talk to each other and they talk to us. That's maybe a somewhat different story. So I think this sequence starts one earlier. So let's go back one. I'm not sure about it. Okay, that's Geary. Let's go back to this one. This was a student of mine, an undergraduate student, and this is part of a series she did. And she made a lot of pictures that look like, well, junky stuff. But in a much larger context, which was about her mother, these pictures became enormously intriguing. And of course, very revealing about her mother, in a way that was very lighthearted. And about South Florida, which is where her mother was living at the time. This is another picture by Molly Matalon, a more recent one. And again, it's a kind of random event. It's got a little Martin Parr thing going on in here. The kind of thing that it's maybe nothing. Take a picture of it. It's really nothing, but maybe it's something else. I've taken a few pictures like this that I think are, that I really, really love, but they're like this. They're not a great picture, and yet this kind of thing happens all the time, and we never frame it. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is Corey Olson, another student from that same cohort. This is the most, how should we say, cliched subject in the universe. Swans. There are swans all over the internet. Why are people taking pictures of swans? There are tons. And everybody takes the same picture, but it doesn't matter. The fact that they take the picture, and it doesn't bother them that people have been taking pictures of swans forever and that they have this mythological content and all that. Doesn't matter. This is actually a beautiful picture when it's printed 6 feet tall. It changes the game. Let's go to the next one. One of the people who's been thinking about why Luigi Geary and what kind of pictures are people taking, who's been thinking almost as hard as Charlie has, was Thomas Damon. And this is from a series he did called Dailies. And this is kind of one-off for him. Damon, as you recall, is the guy who makes paper constructions based on photographs. And then he reshoots the paper construction, gets rid of the original sculpture. He's trained as a sculptor, I believe. Damon usually does this for trauma pictures, stuff that's really big ticket, very familiar, the Oval Office, the court in The Hague, whatever. He changed the game, decided to do the same thing with his cell phone pictures. So he would do a kind of Tickety-Boo. He'd walk around, shoot with his cell phone, random stuff, and then come back, pick the pictures, make the reconstruction in paper, and reshoot it in a large format. I'm not going into why anybody would go through that, but I asked, why would anybody do that? But I did ask him the question, and I said, who's taking these pictures? And his answer to that was everybody. And I said, why are we shooting these pictures? And he said, I don't think it's as important to ask why we're shooting them as it is to ask how we're doing it. How is it? How is the photographic practice? And to me, that's why Charlie's book is so important, because that is front and center. How do we shoot? And it seems to me very clear, and Gary was very aware of this, that in an environment in which we're saturated with images, there's a different way of using and thinking about photography that's absolutely part of a 20-something generation and now 30-somethings. Anyway, if you have a chance to check out the series by Damiani called Dailies, take a look, because it does open a door to, obviously, a lot of material that that we've been talking about, and I think that Charlie's work brings up. Again, the more I look at these, the more I realize how interesting it is to me that someone who's now in his 70s has kind of channeled what the iPhone has meant in recent times. That is the change of visual culture, the change of visual experience that this is the herald of. And Charlie, we've talked about this before, but I wonder if you talk a little bit more about that. What is the change that's happening out there? What are photographs today for people? What do people want from these pictures?
I mean, it's the 64,000 or the $60 million question. Everybody photographs, and everybody knows more about photography than certainly they did a generation ago, and certainly than they did a generation before that. They know, photography is the matrix, I think, of almost everything we do commercially, intellectually. There's a picture, there's the notion of the presence of the camera in 21st century life everywhere. And in almost all art making, the photographic image is part of the discourse in some way. I think people are trying to find nuance in everyday life. I mean, people who are seriously making pictures. There are people who make selfies and people who just make snapshots of their presence and place, or the snapshot picture with the cell phone that our fathers made or mothers made a generation ago. Just oh, that's pretty, I'll take that tree. But I think people who are looking, and they've learned to look because looking is part of our learning. I mean, you have to learn to look, and what we do as teachers, as educators, as serious artists and photographers, I think, is help facilitate people's ability to look and to understand what there is meaning in what they see, in the same way that there's meaning in what they read. Visual literacy is a big issue, and we don't teach it very well, and it's a bad term probably, but learning to look. A picture like this that Damiani took, it's about smoking at one level. It's about little things stuck in a desert, little thing. It's about Bauhaus design tray or whatever. Now he knows how to look. I mean, he's practiced at looking, but what does everybody make every day? I think they try to record something about what they experience, no matter consciously or unconsciously. And we know, I think, that vernacular pictures, and there are billions and billions of them on the cell phone, ultimately, if they can be organized, if they can be categorized and labeled and earmarked and notated and into systems, will tell us a great deal about who we are at any point in history. The problem is not making them, not getting them, but how to find them once they're made. We'll call it the huge crowdsourcing library of imagery really probably tells us more about who we are, what happened, what didn't happen, in the little details of a pretty innocently made picture. And the real task is going to be to the archivist, to the librarian, to really work out algorithms and such that we can really look at all this imagery or some of it. In my case, I'm interested in all that little detritus, all that little confluence of a sign and a person's expression or a hat, the sociology of what the hat represents, and the fact that it's coming back in style. At the same time, I'm interested in composition. And I think a lot of certainly amateurs are not very aware of composition. I love the way this pair works together, not only the hats, but the little stripe on the bag and this little part of the frame, this red and this red, the colors that, it's pleasing to me the way the blues meld together. And the sequences often have to deal with that to make that work, to make the content work. Again, there's this, slightly postmodern. This is a contemporary hat with a 18th century man. He wouldn't have worn a hat like that. I think about Hans Haacke in a lecture he gave here at SVA probably 30 years ago. And I guess he was introduced as a conceptual image maker. And somebody in the audience asked him a question about why his conceptual art seemed so finished, seemed so perfect in the object that expressed the idea. And he got a little testy and he said, the difference is today's artists don't study 2D and 3D design, and they don't learn how to draw. I know how to make things. And I kind of feel that way, that I do know how to make a picture as opposed to just faking it. And sometimes maybe it becomes a little too self-conscious. I'm very careful when I find things spontaneously, and I can act very spontaneously, but I'm very careful about the composition, about the framing of it. It's not just random in that, in terms of the taking.
Right.
It's considered in a fraction of a second.
Yeah, but the word you use, and again, I want to move to a final set of pictures. There's so much more in this book that is evocative, I think. But the word you used was nuance. And there is among the photographers, again, let's call them the 20-somethings that I've had to deal with and that we both had to deal with. Nuance, it strikes me, is enormously important, in the sense that it's not so much the big picture that is being sought, but aspects of reality or things that could be framed that reveal nuances about what's out there. Anything could be culture, could be accident, it could be, the weather, it could be almost anything. But the key is to see the thing that's easily missed, or that maybe you noticed and that you'd never noticed before. It doesn't have to be the thing that's going to tell the story about everything in the world. It doesn't have to be the great picture, but it's like the hat and the bag. There's something going on there where it looks casual, it looks almost accidental, but that you have a sense, you almost can't avoid it, that we're being shown something that there's a nuance that we need to pay attention to. Again, it's not necessarily going to change our lives, but the ultimate, I think, result of these pictures, if we can not get overwhelmed, is that we are sensitive to things in ways, and maybe that's what the camera is all about. That's what the cell phone camera at its best is all about. We become sensitive to things in our world that we otherwise would just pass by. And like you say, if we can archive these, if we can have them, then we might be able to go back and actually think about our experience. And that, I mean, that's an enormously important thing.
And that has meaning in psychology, sociology, anthropology, all the things we do in terms of design, how we organize ourselves, how we present ourselves, fashion, style, all those things. And I think it's also a reason that a lot of museums now, collections, photographic, are collecting vernacular pictures, snapshots from mid 20th century back, even 70s back. They're very popular and very in display a great deal because we see in them a reflection of what we once were, what we once thought we might be. You know, it isn't the picture of grandma in the front yard is as interesting as maybe the toys that are left in the yard. That
Sure.
Something about, you know, a play gun.
Right. And best of all, if the person who photographed the toys left in the yard had some pretty personal ideas about why those toys might be important, right?
Yeah.
Then it's the best of all.
See them at all. And they're there. And future seers will say, look at that. All those kids played with toy guns in the 50s.
Okay, I would be remiss. There's so many more topics we could touch on. Like we could talk about what is beauty, big ticket stuff. We could talk about politics. But I want to look at a sequence, and this kind of a perfect one. I want to look at 34 through 38, if we could. And I was again struck by this. So this is 34. And again, it comes in the middle of a bunch of of a chapter, let's say, but I'm just pulling these out. And that's the end of the sequence. And it's like Charlie Traub channels the American Road picture.
Right. I was just going to say.
It's like everybody shows up here, you know, Winogrand, Len Gential shows up here, and obviously Stephen Shore a little bit, you know, and a whole bunch of other people who, you know, have been hooked on these kinds of kind of cultural oddities and, you know, just every aspect of the American road. These kind of, again, the whole, what the Native American becomes in American road photography. All that stuff is there. When you did this chapter, were you thinking about, I'm going to do the road, I'm going to do a send up?
Yeah, I think go through it again. I just want to go. Yeah, it is all about the road, and then it goes into another chapter where there's actually pictures of the road itself more. And you know, let's face it, America is defined by the road and by, you know, our so-called freedom to get from here to there. And I think this last picture here is, oh, I wish I could be on one of those boats. You know, I don't want to be on the road, or, you know, and then the mammoth quality of that big ship, you know, I mean, they're everywhere. And people, I've never been on one, but people adore them. And, you know, it's a sort of magical dream right there. And the road is a dream. I went on several trips as a young teenager, 13, 14, with my father and mother and brother to the West. You know, that was our vacation, 3-week vacation, you know, almost every year for a few years. And it was fantastic, you know, I mean, boring at one level and being in the car, but I've been taking the road trip all my life, you know, and I would do anything to be able to get out there right now and take a road trip and look at America. And I've done road trips in Europe. I've done road trips in Java, you know, of all places. That's what photographers do. That's another reason I hate these terms. I'm a street photographer. I might be a road photographer, a car photographer, or a restaurant photographer. I mean, and, you know, I'm a conceptual photographer. All good artists conceptual, you know, it's the concept comes in the work that we do, putting it together. Maybe I had no idea what how these pictures would fall together when I made them. I did know, and I do know, that I see what I see. I mean, I've become comfortable with who I am as a looker, as a voyeur, even as a contour, a flaneur, all those words, but as a photographer. And I don't have any desire whatsoever to construct something for a picture. It's too fantastic what you stumble on and what you find out there. I could never make something to be photographed. I had to do it when I did some commercial work once. I hated it. It didn't make any sense to me. So,
well, yeah, the other thing about this sequence I love so much is that it gets me thinking about the iPhone and traveling, and the first that first photo book that I've been able to find, I have a copy of, from 2005 of the Ericsson phone, was explicitly a road trip book. That's why it was printed by, I can't remember, I think maybe Sony printed it, and that's what it was. It was like they gave this guy the iPhone camera, they sent him across the country. I can't remember who it was a photographer, and they printed the pictures he brought back. What I'm thinking is, again, the whole idea that the road trip becomes not about the trip, but about representing the trip, about finding the pictures to post on Instagram of the trip, so that by the time you get to the end of this sequence, and I'm thinking about that, we've got these people on the shore looking at the boat. I can't tell if the boat's real or whether it's been photoshopped in, or, is it a mural? It's really, the stuff gets into your head in the sense that you become so inured to the idea that however you experience anything must have a representation connected to it. And it can't just be in your head. You got to have pictures of it, not just one, but a bunch. And I think that's very much where we are. And I think anybody looking at these pictures has a sense of like, yeah, I want to take a road trip so I can make photographs. Not, I want to see like Texarkana. No, yeah, I want to go there, but no, I want to make some photographs there. And so there's something kind of inspirational about this. And that's kind of an American tradition anyway.
It is. And I see it happening with some of my Chinese students who've been taking road trips.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They are actually making pictures that that reference the tradition of the American road trip. And you begin to think, where am I? When you
yeah, exactly. Where am I? What am I looking at?
I actually had a picture of a McDonald's that I pulled out from the cell phone to put in this group. And it was so McDonald-like. It was perfect McDonald's. Then I realized this is not America. This was Hungary. It was in Budapest.
Right. It was the foreign. It was like the European
road trip.
trip.
I didn't have a place for it, but it was so McDonald's, and the reason I took it was because it was Budapest, but without a title on it, didn't make any sense.
Charlie, it's really been fun. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, but I think we should give people a chance to chime in. I know there's probably a lot of questions out there, and I appreciate your taking the time. It's really been fun to do this. I've been looking at these pictures for a while. I'm
the one who's grateful for your insight and the work that you put into this, thinking about and really looking at the book. And, I have to say, photo books need to be looked at. Absolutely. Notice in this, there's no text, and that's deliberate because it needs to be viewed like reading. And Lyle, you did it, and you got it, and I appreciate it greatly. So yeah, let's do some questions.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I'm having so much fun. I've now forgiven you for not telling me to wear a suit today.
I didn't wear a suit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What I got underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not doing that. We're not doing that.
This is a family show. All right. We are going to go to our first question from Rail NSE superstar GE Schwartz. GE, you can unmute now.
Oh, gosh, thank you so much. Make me blush. A.G. Liebling said, everything is going to be tickety-boo eventually.
I hope
didn't know
somebody
that,
would get
but
to this.
Oh,
I
yeah,
wish I
that's-
knew that quote.
Oh, no, that's Liebling. It's from some of his wartime journaling. And I don't have a specific essay, but it's one of the earlier ones from about maybe 43, somewhere in there. But anyway, and I think he also maybe came up with, or at least he used hunky dory at about the same time. I don't know if that's his or not, but it's in that kind of space. Does your work and your philosophy of your work related all to this, or in some way other sense of tickety-boo?
Yes, I've heard the word used mostly by Brits, but and Indians, but I always sensed that it was used like everything's okay, it's great. Well, maybe not, and that's, I think, the spirit of the book as I see it. That it is what it is, and okay, this is what we got, and it's okay, and we're just gonna tickety-boo through it, and maybe everything isn't all right. Maybe,
But it's so Luigi Giri too. Think of the title of Giri's book. It's beautiful here, isn't it?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And I like people to wonder, okay, to ask the very question you just asked, that they're thinking about, what does tickety-boo really mean? What does okay mean?
Okay.
Thumbs up. Everybody's using the thumb now, obviously, for the same expression.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it could be a phrase that would be in a Lynch movie or something too, at that point, with the thumb up, kind of a thing. But thank you so much.
Thank you. For the Liebling quote, I didn't know that.
Thank you, GE, and thank you, Charles, for answering. And now we're going to go to our next question from Michael Krasowitz. Michael, you can unmute now.
Oh, hello. Very interesting conversation. Come on. I was just thinking, and I had taken a class with Ralph Gibson many years ago, and he did these art books, and I had asked him about how he sequenced his pictures. And I thought that what he did was he would look for shapes, and he would repeat the shapes from one page to the next, and then transition the page from one to the next. I thought was really interesting. My question is, do you think that because everything is stopped down, everything is in focus, there's a standard foreground, middle ground, background, is there a relationship between the aesthetic of the camera and the F64 group, where everything was stopped down and everything was sharp?
It's a very interesting question, because when I got into photography, with pretty traditional mentors and image makers, the idea, and Ansel Adams's technical books were sort of Bibles at the time. They really still are in many ways. The idea is to get things sharp. The camera can render things incredibly sharp, more so than any other medium. And the iPhone is remarkably sharp. And I almost always have made pictures with full depth of field and as sharp as I can get them. Because I think all that little detail, all that little stuff on the side, all that little wallpaper or whatever's behind counts and is important to the content of the image. And lots of it you don't see, or you see unconsciously, but you try to see as much as you can, the more practiced you are. And so I'm a practitioner of sharp pictures. I don't know any other way to make them. I've never used a soft focus lens or anything like that, or low. I guess sometimes I've used a low f-stop at night or something, and let the depth of field go from something. But my intention is to make it sharp. I hope that answers your question. An F64, for those who don't know, is about big view camera work from California and just after the war from Ansel and Weston and a whole group of photographers who believed that was very important to stop down as far as you can. Get it sharp.
It opens the door to another, maybe even a bigger issue. And that has to do with what does it mean to bring together a camera that gives you, in some ways, the kind of clarity that became a kind of gold standard with an approach that's it can be incredibly casual. So it's like, it would be like, how do you take an 8x10 view camera out onto the street? You know, it's like, and let's face it, people have done that. And somebody like Joel Meyerowitz, for example, was taking the big camera out onto the street to try to figure out what would be the relationship between something that was really slow and something that was really fast. And to me, this is kind of where we are as well. It's another set of experiments with a different technology that's kind of playing back and forth between what's a very formal picture and what's the street, what's spontaneous, what's possible. And that's another reason why I think this book is super interesting. You get all that. You get all those different approaches, shall we say.
Thank you, Michael, for that original question. And thank you, Charles and Lyle, for jumping off of it so swiftly. We are now going to go to a question from Susan Landgraf. Susan, you can unmute now.
What a wonderful conversation. I would like to see this conversation continued for quite some time, not now, obviously. But
We'll give you a break.
but yeah,
Not now.
But this
Maybe
conversation, this conversation does need to go on. It needs to go on in a video format. It needs to get out into the world. But I have a question, but since Lyle's on the screen right now, I'll just ask Lyle what the belt is doing on his couch.
Oh my God, it's actually not a belt, it's a snake.
No, it's not. Anyway, that wasn't my question. I just had to point out something about seeing. Okay, and Malvina has said it's actually a whip. Of course, we could think of it, but we're not going there.
We're not going to go there.
No, we're not.
We're not going there.
Back to Aide's New York downtown. Anyway, my question, even though I had lots of questions, is that there was a lot of talk about this cell phone. And I think the most interesting aspect of this talk came in with Michael's question and the connection between the clarity of the image without depth of field and going back to F64 and those people who, as someone said, was a gold standard. And yes, I grew up in that world as well. There was so much talk of the tool, and my question was, has the tool really changed the way people see? Because it's really about how people are seeing. It's about the need for everyone to find meaning in their lives. And Charles, you started this by talking about this being you seeking for yourself through this long period of your sort of public life, which also intersected with a private life. And images allow, no matter what the tool, images allow for people to interpret them and to come to understand things about the way they see the world. So all this conversation about the iPhone really, to me, brings up the fact that it is suddenly allowing everyone to pay attention to their seeing.
But that's a huge thing.
It's
It's a
huge.
huge thing.
It's absolutely huge. I mean, this is like boys saying everyone is an artist. Yes, everyone is a photographer. And so as educators, how do you get people to really understand this? And Charles has selected the diptych. Charles, tell us about your choice of the diptych in this book. I'd like to hear about that.
Well, I think Lyle said it quite well, that, you know, there are a lot of good pictures in there. Are there great pictures? Some maybe. But I felt that a book is something that has a narrative in it. I think all photographs, even individually, have a narrative of some sort. And I felt that I didn't need text. I didn't think cell phone pictures should have borders on them and, you know, be one picture on a page. And I saw this thing from the beginning as a block. In fact, I wish I could put 200 more pictures in it. It's a matter of economics. And the diptychs just came together as, okay, you got this goes with this for many reasons, you know, content-wise or nuance-wise or color-wise, theme-wise. And then we developed the themes, you know, there's a theme on sexuality, there's a theme on food and on the road and all of that. And it just allowed the book to flow. Yeah, and of course it needed some breaks, hence the yellow pages. But I love the fact that the gutter, you know, there's no separation between the two images. In fact, I'm in a show coming up in Kentucky where I've actually printed them, you know, almost 2.5 feet long as diptychs. And they came out beautifully. And the cell phone has changed our seeing. We see things also in sequences on the cell phone because we go through it, you know, after we take it, we see all these pictures we made that day, very fast, very immediately, even more immediate than a Polaroid or whatever. That's the greatness of it. You can see what the hell you're doing of digital photography in general. But on the cell phone, you have this long line at the bottom. You just go through until you find what you want, you know. It allows us to get close. It allows us to take a picture without being singled out as the photographer who's taking my picture. And it goes everywhere and anywhere. And it works great at night. It works great, you know, in the bathtub.
So it's really a tool towards freedom.
Absolutely. I think so.
Okay, so so
I
really
said that in the beginning. I felt complete freedom, a kind of freedom that, you know, you get. I'm 76 years old. You know, there's a time I used to go around with a 4x5. You know, I got a bad shoulder from that, you know, and camera bags and all that stuff that we used to schlep around, you know. I'm very relieved not to do it. I have good digital cameras that are pretty small, but I'm not sure I need them.
okay. Well,
Thank you.
I'm going to have to look at this book because you've intrigued me with what you've done. It really does.
Now you're looking at it.
Very funny, very funny. So thank you all. Thank the Rail for this wonderful conversation. And what I said at the beginning, I do hope that you carry this conversation further.
Thank you.
It's a valuable conversation at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It's been so lovely to hear from you and to hear you and Charles in discussion just now. I have a question, which is, I think, pretty related to Susan's question about how or if iPhones really changed the way people see. And I, you know, obviously from perspective as a 20-something or whatever you'd like to call that, would say that definitely iPhones do change perception. And I guess I'm asking maybe more for comments on this concept, thinking about I don't know if you both are familiar with Instagram accounts like Subway Hands and Sam Euclid. Like these are Instagram accounts that do just a huge amount of like almost, it's kind of anti-archival in some ways because it's just so much media, right?
Mhm.
So I'm wondering.
Yeah, it is anti-archival. That's exactly right. I think that's right.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like kind of what you think about things like that, or even just on the note of like that much media being anti-archival. Sometimes I think that that amount of media can also be anti, because you're talking about learning to look, right? And I think in some ways it can be detrimental to the looking of a person, where like sometimes I'll catch myself looking at something and being like, oh, that's just like Subway Hands, right? That's just like this Instagram post I saw earlier. Or I'll be in the park and I'll be watching kids play and I'll be like, oh my God, this is like slow TV, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to experience, right? So I'm guessing, I guess I want to hear what you guys think about how we move forward with reversing the amount of media we're taking in to refocus on archival and perception.
Can I jump in,
Well, you have
Charlie?
to do that.
If you ponder for a minute. I want to jump in on a couple of things.
Please.
Kind of off what Susan said. I think it's changed the way people see. Okay, but I don't think it's made them necessarily more attentive to their reality. Right? Those two things are not necessarily the same thing. People make a lot of pictures for sure. And the anti-archival thing is very much a response. It's a kind of, well, this gets into a much more complicated kind of discussion, but it is deeply anti-archival. That is to say, it's an embrace of, you might say, the totality of image making as, in a sense, fundamentally meaningless. That is to say, the making of meaning lies elsewhere, but that generates its own issues and its own archive. I find it really problematic in the sense that there's not a way out. We are absolutely immersed, and it's not going to change. In fact, I mean, Charlie was pointing out about the levels of production. And I remember so well that we had a conference at SVA that was organized by some students, and there were a bunch of faculty sitting up there, and everybody was just like wringing their hands, going like, and it was all numbers, 12 billion, a million a minute, and everybody was freaking out. And one of the students kind of stood up and said, you know, you guys. Basically, she said, you guys talk about tsunami like it's a bad thing, you know? And it's like, it's just the water we swim in. And it does point out to me, and maybe this is just a stupid thing or an obvious thing, you know, there are such things as photographers. That is, there are, as casual as it might seem, or as irrelevant as it might seem, there are people who actually, as Charlie said before, they understand things about image making, about the communication of meaning, about how photographs actually are looked at by people. And they can use that knowledge to make meaningful experiences. They're out there. The fact that that photographic technology is just like a generator and it's like it's an avalanche or a tsunami, that doesn't gainsay the fact that meaning is our game. That's what we do. And the onslaught of images is just, that's what we have to deal with. Could be words, you know, we all speak. That's what we do. And we use words to make meaning, but we also use pictures. And that kind of sophistication or that kind of attentiveness is something that, you know, let's face it, it doesn't come easily. You have to care about that. You have to want that. And you have to think that images are a way of structuring meaning. And if you believe that and you're committed to that, which is somebody like Charlie obviously is, then you can do things. You really can. Now, are people going to look at those things? Is anybody going to care? That's a different issue. And just on another note, this conversation has really gotten me thinking about not Luigi Giri, but Gary Winogrand. And the worst thing that ever happened to Gary Winogrand was being adopted as an art photographer by the Museum of Modern Art. It has completely blinded us to the nature of his true practice. And that practice is a lot closer to what we see in kind of, you might say, Instagram practice than any of the stuff that was being made around him. Certainly, he is not Lee Friedlander. He has no relationship to that. Those, in spite of the fact that whoever he was friends with, whoever he shot with, even Charlie has an experience of Gary. But this work is much more in tune. And I don't think it's accidental that this is coming back more and more. And we can make cases for Winogrand as a very, you might say, a very thoughtful photographer. That's not what he was. He was something completely different. And we have to, I think it's important to face up to that. And the Winogrand that we have seen so far was a creation of other people, not just Gary Winogrand. But it's contemporary image making that allows us to rethink the history of photography. And that's super important.
By the way, just as a coda to that, the Museum of Modern Art turned its nose up at Luigi Giri. When we
Of course.
They had no interest in it whatsoever. In fact, they challenged us while we were showing it. Of course, now they're trying to get as many Giris as they can.
That makes perfect sense.
And your point about Winogrand is very true. Too many people tried to curate him, and Drew Sawyer's work I think at the Brooklyn Museum was one of the best things because it allowed the viewer to make their own associations.
Absolutely. That was a game changer for me.
That was a game changer. And there's much, and this is probably true, of any great artist, really. How they're curated, who champions them, who doesn't, can make a great deal of difference. But
and how they think about how they interact with their own work.
Yeah.
I mean, that ultimately is what it's about. What is it that you as photographer are actually think you're doing? And that may not necessarily be what the other guys think. And it may not be what, I don't know what MoMA thinks or anybody thinks. And with Winogrand, we're still scratching our heads about that. We're still not quite sure how to deal with that because he was the first Google cam. He was the first one. Before we had Google cameras, we had Gary Winogrand. And,
That's a good point. And he was, one of the things that's changed, that this red phone and all my red in the back, Gary shot. I mean, he could shoot 20, 30 rolls a day. And as we know, when he died, there was hundreds of rolls undeveloped. He couldn't keep up with it. And the truth is we can do that with this. And
we can, absolutely, and we do.
As expensive as cell phones are, I laugh at, I live near Washington Square, and I went there quite frequently throughout the COVID to sit and watch and enjoy the festivities that are there. The young hipsters walking around with $8,000 Leicas, often film ones. What the hell? They got all the look. And I can't tell you, I thought I might do a project on just photographing all these young people with Leicas. Where do they get the money in? And a lot of them are using film. It's so inhibiting using film because you're thinking, oh, that roll of film cost me $15 and I got to process it. With this, or a digital camera for that matter, take as many pictures as you want. The question becomes editing. And that's the point all the way along the line. Photography is always about what to leave out, whether in the making of the picture, whether in the sequencing, whether in the selection off of the sheet, whether how you frame it. It's painting is what to put in and photography is what to leave out. So it's editing always. And the editing is pretty neat with these things. Pretty easy to see it immediately and experience what you're doing and learn from that picture for the next encounter.
Thank you, Charles and Lyle. Those are all things that I think about all the time. It's so lovely to hear you talk about them. I really am loving ending on the note of you know,
Thank
painting is what you put in, photography you leave out.
You're a
And,
great host, a great moderator, and thank everybody at the Rail for bringing us this far along, and Lyle in particular for this, and following us there somewhere.
yes, that's my next task. I'll get in trouble if I skip it. We now are so honored to welcome the comments of Fong Bui. Fong, are you ready?
Never. That's the whole idea. You never get ready for anything. But Charlie, good to see you here. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, it's terrific. I was in and out with meeting in between, but it's terrific to hear you talk about the latest project. I think the last time that I have a chance to talk in greater depth with you, Charlie, was when you had that wonderful show at Liederman Gallery for your that wonderful group of square formatted black and white early on of your career.
Early pictures,
Like,
yeah.
exactly 67 to 90 or something. But I always thought of our mutual friend Luigi Ballarini, and I always felt like Charles Traub, you know, Lyle, to Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. It's like Luigi to Milan, Italy. There's incredible similarity in that Charlie had been the center from the get-go early on with Light Gallery, critic, advocate for fellow photographers, writers, you know, teachers, I mean, all of it. It's just amazing in the same way that Luigi has been as a poet, writer, critic, translator, incredible advocate for his fellow poets too. This is actually Luigi's greatest amazing volume.
Wow.
First one on Italian, anthology of Italian poetry from Pasolini to the present, volume 1. And I just felt incredible kinship between the two, and thank you for having introduced Luigi to the Rail. Make a note this, Nick, we must invite Luigi to be the radical poetry curator. And
Yes.
so I was thinking this, two questions here, Charlie. One is that there's a nature of your inherent democratic vistas. It's always in you because of what you do so immersively. And I can't help but to think of our beloved friend, the late Jonas Makers, who had the similar ability. But in the idea of life being transient and ephemeral, and yet is full of wonderful glimpses of images. And I never met anybody who can have all of these images, fleeting ones, escape their gaze, their attention. And that's something that I felt similar to your ability. And there's a political dimension to this, Lyle. And I wanted to see whether you can share with us what that meant, that democratic vista, that political certainty that lie below in everyday practice, which I get 2 minutes to follow up what Ty's earlier question. But for now, I really wanted to know, Charlie, the literary aspects in the work and the daily practice, you know, that's similar to Jonas's worldview. There's an intimacy there that is so personal and at the same time incredibly generous to general viewer. And where does that come from, Charlie?
So it's a long question to answer. I mean, it's the answer is long to the question. I guess I felt very lucky to be embraced and find photography in my life. I was a literature major by schooling. And I was also learning disabled. And I thought, this medium is liberating me. And I was very fortunate to meet very great mentors early on, very early on, in improbable ways. And I felt that my role was to continue that support of this medium and the education and views of what this medium met. Remember, when I got into it, we were in the basement, literally and figuratively, in the art world. And though there were great photographer artists around and people knew about them, in the art school and the museum, we were in the basement. And we fought to really fully establish the medium as an art form. My generation and the generation before me, people like Nathan Lyon, somebody mentioned in one of the notes, the people from the Institute of Design, many mentors here, Lizette Modell and in New York, and others certainly in Europe. But we won the battle. I mean, photography is at the, or at least the lens and screen arts, as I call it, is at the center of all creative visual discourse. Nevertheless, the art world and the photography world is very, very competitive, very jealous, very backstabbing and corkscrewing and all kinds of other things, because ambition gets in the way. And of course, I have it like anyone else. But I always felt that I must nurture, because I was so well nurtured, this field and those who want to pursue it and those who want to support it, and art as practice and art as part of the substance of our humanism, that we often get mixed up with a lot of other things, including capitalism and so on and so forth. And I felt that obligation because of, frankly, how well I was treated by people who could have ignored me. I don't know if that answers the question. And I think that the medium is so broad. I mean, I am what we would call a straight photographer, a real world witness photographer, but I like all aspects of it. And I think it should be anointed. I don't think we should, and this program I do, we don't do that. We let anybody pursue wherever they go. And I think unfortunately, we can't acknowledge all the wonderful talent that is out there. It's just, there's one. And then there's a lot of bad talent. And it was said earlier, you have to practice, you have to learn how to see, learn how to learn this medium. And most people can't do it by themselves. And it's important to showcase it, to show the variety and to show the differences that are in all the practices that this medium can embrace.
Yeah, it's so great that you mentioned Nathan Lyon, who was very important mentor to the formation of our friend, David Levi Strauss.
Right, of course.
And so the mentee is part of the deep philosophy in the Brooklyn Rail, why it was created. Because similarly, I was nurtured by my Shapiro, like the way you were. Of course, we had that, but in addition to it is how do you facilitate that democratic vista with a certain fearlessness, Lyle? The fearlessness through repetition, the act of doing, which is to your question earlier, Ty. It's not that dissimilar than any other medium, really, even though it's relatively new as opposed to, say, painting. But the story goes, once when Pollock was trying to quit drinking in 41, 42 or so, when he was still making psychoanalytic drawing, was undergoing Jungian psychiatrist named Dr. Rosette Henderson. And he, being an unverbal human being, couldn't articulate his dream and fear and whatnot, inner trouble. So he was suggested by Dr. Henderson to make drawings, so to speak, so then he could analyze the drawing. There's a whole entire book on it. But when he brought the whole portfolio that very summer to his dealer, Eugene Thor and Claire, and Thor told me this story early on, that their children, in fact, Claire Thor say, they're very charming, Jackson, but I bet you my children can do it just as well. And Paula's response was, Ty, I know, but I do it every day. And that's the difference. It's really have little to do with skill. It's a persistence of how deeply you are invested and how much curious you are. And once you understand that curiosity and follow the calling, discipline of everyday's work is what exactly what required. Absolutely. And
It's
that's
called practicing.
or practicing. And that's what something that I also learned from
Pianist has to practice every day.
Yep,
So do we.
exactly.
As artists, so do we.
And thank you, Charlie, because I know
Thank
that
you.
and
Thank you for all that the rail is. And I can't thank you enough.
it's the beginning of our collaboration, Charlie. Seriously. Right, Lyle? Lyle is becoming like a star of our NSE now. People love Lyle when every time he comes on. So thank you so much. Back to you, Ty.
Thank you, Fong. And thank you, Charles and Lyle, one more time. I hope that we can all take Fong and Charlie's advice and move and find our avenue to act and invest ourselves in it accurately. Now, as many of you know, at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I am thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Cynthia Dewi Oka, to the stage. Poet Cynthia Dewi Oka is the author of Fire is Not a Country, forthcoming in fall 2021 from Northwestern University Press. She is also the author of Salvage, Poems, and Nomad of Salt and Hard Water. The recipient of the Tupelo Quarterly Poetry Prize and the Leeway Transformation Award, her writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Poetry, Academy of American Poets, The Rumpus, Pank, Guernica, and elsewhere. She has taught creative writing at Bryn Mawr College and is a 2021-22 Amy Clampett resident. She is the creator of Sanctuary, a migrant poetry workshop for immigrant poets based in Philadelphia, and is originally from Bali, Indonesia. Cynthia, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ty, Malvika, and Nick, the team. Thank you so much to Lyle and Charles. I learned so much today. I feel like my brain is exploding. And I just really deeply appreciated the conversation. I was actually just thinking this week about how reliant I am on my iPhone camera as like a memory tool as well. And as a poet who uses a lot of imagery in my work, it's almost like there is this device by which I can teach myself to look at things the way that I would want to look at them, if that makes sense, to like pause and search. And I was just thinking about that when you were talking about how integral like just images are to even memory and a sense of self. So that's something I'm just gonna take a lot out of the conversation today. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read two poems for you all today. The first one is from my upcoming book. The second one is like a new one that I just finished a little while ago. 21 Lessons in the Art of Embouchure. There are right and wrong ways to put your mouth around the void in the metal. The mother is a hidden compound. The mother is a king, lonely and gray, whose crown of matches is alive. Prepare for Harrow and Beauty, their digressions. A coastline littered by boats and the dark dirt of desire is battered by the notion of universality. Blue and green, like a seam of locusts, intent that no grain of sand should escape what they cannot eat. Of its own realm, where the disc is chipped, it skips, repeating the same please, like a history of brokenness. Holding her own hand, the king hurries past the sea. A billion hind legs rubbing. This is how God is composed. Past the white arches of whales toward the garden sanity, where someone is coming. Someone is coming is the hook of the song. I believed it with the strength of insects, the strength of kings. The boy abandoned to sunflowers makes his horn by mutilating his bowl. They are not so different from each other. Beauty and harrow, king and sunflower. The universal is hard of hearing. The mouth is a void, a compound of God that makes promises such as, I am coming, while the mother's belly dome, metallic, shines with questions. Was I clear enough, loud enough, unmistakable, sweet enough? The boy's blue lips are a digression. They bleed now around the hole music makes. Even light is suspended like a hooked fish in the hard, jeweled air. Douse your head between the hidden and the shut doors. This second poem, I do need to preface a little bit because I wrote it in response to a television series. So I don't know if any of you are Marvel fans, but because my son is a teenager, I have to be one. So this poem is a response to, I wrote it in response to the series WandaVision, which is a spin-off of the larger Avengers film series. And the central protagonist in this in the television show is Wanda Maximoff, who has magical powers to alter reality. So she can change how things look and how things operate to fit like her version of events. So in this television series, like the premise of the show is that her lover Vision has died. So he died in like one of the big Avengers series. And in this series, she brings him back to life. And a whole lot of chaos ensues. For Wanda Maximoff, who stands accused of necromancy. Yellow spills from her, weaves into the figure of her beloved, proof that abandonment is something the abandoned can reverse. He is indestructible as air inside the walls of her wishing, which I must admit is at once tender and obliterating, if brief, like a poem, because even the most radical of us can hardly tolerate imagining a woman alive, lovingly, violently, inside a context of her own making, for too long without feeling robbed. It would be preferable, ethically speaking, for her to be one of the thousands in the fictive town of Westview, New Jersey, whose minds were hijacked for her version of events to be true. I too, with my small, unreliable powers, have told myself, rewrite everything. Let me call the men who took from me what I did not agree to give, victims of history. Let me call allegiance the woman who pressed me to the pounding in her ribs, night after scorpion night, whispered to me the tale of the mother who ran into a burning house to save her daughter, or was it the other way around? What I remember is a face charred beyond recognition, a woman who spends her life hiding it. I have never owned a house. Before I was a wife, I could fit in less than an hour in exactly 4 boxes, all that I belonged to. Before I was a wife, I wore other disguises. A smashed telephone, rain, rat pacing the city's arterial network of shit and electricity under the exertion of cops whose pits are stained dark with bullying the homeless so they can pay off their 30-year mortgages which let me call conditions of possibility in late American capitalism. I mean to say, even before I was a wife, I bound my violence, retrofitted my vision, if not to be loved, then not to be thrown away. Perhaps the lesson is visions are fragile things, like faces. I'm thinking of my sisters now, its mix of pity and horror. That day we found a gull trapped on the balcony of an apartment I was living in with a man I had not yet decided to leave. The bird limped, it could not take off. And I, who always saw my shadow as my sister's shield, narrated myself her protector, froze, while she emptied a storage bin, chased the broken bird into it, then shut the lid. It's too weak, she said, because she is a scientist and animals are not metaphors to her. The pack won't want it. Still, we carried it, thrashing down the elevator, across the street, to the park by the bus station, where other gulls plucked beetles from the grass with yellow beaks. The walls of my wishing flame up, fall down. I will not call it strength anymore. Outside her window, while the world she has built over against the one in which she loses and loses and loses, disappears. Wanda touches the face of her vision, who after all is a trick of her own light. It is nearly the end of summer. I am packing again. There will be no carrying it all this time. Not my father's pride, not my mother's face. I choose the violence that is mine to yellow anyone's mind. I mean to say, there will be something I call my life. Thank you.
How just absolutely incredible. I'm swimming in all of those lines right now. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for these lovely ruminations on Marvel and media and the mind. And thank you, Lyle and Charles, for truly one of the most fun new social environments I've had the pleasure of emceeing. And thank you all who shared your questions and tuned in today. As always, we will share this recording of today's program in our YouTube archives, so it'll be available in a day or two if you'd like to revisit the conversation. And we at the Rail do this every day, so please join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. for another lovely installment of our Radical Poetry series curated by Ishmael Reed. And now you may all turn on your microphones and say goodbye or hello or thank you as you leave.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Lyle.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Incredible.
Wow, thanks, Charles.
Just mind-blowingly incredible. Thank you so much for making the time.
I think
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you,
Bye.
Charlie.
Malvika.
Thank you, Lyle.
Thank you,
Thank
Fong.
Charlie. Thank you, Lyle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And Mika, and of course, Ty. Thank you all.
Oh, yeah. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure, Lyle.
Thank
I
you,
think,
Cynthia.
Thank you, Lyle. Thank you, Charlie.
Oh my God,
Courage.
I'm with your thoughts earlier.
What a beautiful reading. Also, Cynthia. Wow.
That was an amazing discussion. Thank you all.
I
Thanks,
feel
Courage.
so deeply nurtured.
I think
Yes.
Clark in the
Thank you.
audience, Clark had something he
Clark.
wanted to share.
Clark, what do you have in mind to share with us? Unmute yourself first.
He is unmuted.
Yeah. We can't hear him.
I know, I wonder, Mark, if maybe your headphones are not connected to your microphone.
I also saw earlier, Mark Kozlov.
Yes, Max was here. He was in the house.
Clark,
I know.
sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry, we can't hear
Sign
you.
language.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you all so
We'll
much.
pick it up. I call you right after this clock. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Fawn.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, G. Thank you, Charlie.
Beautiful.
Lyle.
I just want to say, I'm just amazed at the energy of the big entity of the rail.
Yay.
And everything, all this organization and selection of wonderful people and eclectic and connected at the same time. And it's a major force in our environment of creativity. Thank you.
Well, Charlie, you know, it's thank God for Aristotle's wisdom. When I was so angry when Trump came to television and deployed that term social distancing, I was so angry, but then Aristotle say, anybody can become angry, that's easy, but to be angry to the right person and to the right degree and at the right time, purpose, and in the right way that is not within everybody in power, and that's not easy. So that's it. We found the subject of our anger. So if he want to use speed to destroy culture, we will intensify the slowness of culture. So that's it. We do it every day.
I haven't recorded that.
Charlie, I love you, Charlie.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And Lyle, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll talk again.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Bye,
Okay, bye all.
Thank you,
Thank
Charlie.
you, thank
Pleasure.
you, thank you,
Like-
thank you.
As always.
Bye.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Bye.
Beautiful lunch.